My dad made me happy today. We will never forget what happened. Daniel Harper did not expect anything special from that quiet Saturday morning in Chicago, especially not from a life that had felt dull and heavy for months. But everything changed the moment his phone lit up with his father's name. At 32, Daniel had grown used to silence filling his apartment, the kind of silence that followed him after his divorce, the kind that made even sunlight feel cold, and he moved through his days like a man carrying invisible weight, working long hours at a downtown marketing firm, coming home to microwave dinners, scrolling through old photos he told himself he should delete but never did, and wondering when exactly he had stopped feeling alive. So when Michael Harper called at 8 in the morning and simply said, "Pack a small bag, I'll pick you up in an hour," Daniel almost laughed because his father was many things: steady, reliable, practical, but spontaneous was never one of them. Still, there was something in Michael's voice that day, something lighter, almost hopeful, and Daniel had not heard that tone in years, not since before his mother passed away, not since life had shifted into something more serious and quiet between them. He stood in his small kitchen staring at the phone after the call ended, debating whether to make an excuse. But instead he packed jeans, a sweater, and a toothbrush, unsure where they were going, yet strangely willing to follow. When the old blue truck pulled up outside his building, Daniel noticed a thermos and two wrapped breakfast sandwiches waiting on the center console, a small detail that reminded him how his father always prepared before saying much. And as they drove north out of the city, skyscrapers fading into open highways and then into wide fields, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. He asked where they were headed, but Michael only smiled and said, "Somewhere you used to love." And that sentence hit deeper than he expected because Daniel had not thought about love in months without feeling pain attached to it. As the miles passed, memories started to return in flashes: wood smoke, early morning fishing trips, his mother's laughter echoing near water. And when the truck turned onto a gravel road lined with tall trees, realization washed over him all at once. Lake Geneva. They had not been there in years, not since before his wedding, before adulthood had pulled him into schedules and responsibilities, and a marriage that slowly faded into distance. The cabin came into view, small and weathered but standing strong against time, and Daniel felt 12 years old again, stepping out of the truck with unsure excitement, hearing the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes, breathing in air that smelled like pine and water instead of traffic and concrete. He did not understand why his father brought him there now, especially after months of watching him withdraw, cancel plans, avoid family dinners, and brush off questions about how he was really doing. But Michael seemed calm, like he had been waiting for this moment. Inside the cabin, dust floated in soft light from the windows. The old wooden table still stood near the center, and Daniel ran his hand across it, remembering nights when his parents played cards while he sketched quietly in the corner, dreaming about becoming an artist before practical life choices redirected him. He realized how far he had drifted from that version of himself, the one who painted sunsets without worrying about deadlines or bank accounts. And as he turned to ask his father again what this trip was about, he noticed Michael watching him carefully, not with pity, but with understanding. There were no dramatic speeches, no heavy lectures, just presence, and that presence alone made Daniel feel less alone than he had in months. The lake shimmered outside, calm and steady, and for the first time since his divorce, Daniel's thoughts were not filled with what he had lost, but with what he once loved. He remembered proposing by that same lake years ago, full of hope, believing life would always move forward in a straight line. And though that chapter had ended, standing there now did not hurt the way he expected. Instead, it felt like being given space to breathe. His father set their bags down and opened the windows, letting fresh air fill the room, and Daniel realized this was not just a random trip, but something intentional, something planned with care. Michael had always shown love through action, fixing broken things, driving long distances without complaint, standing quietly beside his son during hard times. And this was another one of those actions, bigger than words, deeper than advice. Daniel felt a small but steady warmth growing inside him, a feeling he had almost forgotten. And though he still did not know what would happen next, he knew this day was different, because for the first time in a long while, he was not alone in his struggle. He was not hiding behind busy work or polite smiles. He was simply a son sitting in a cabin with his father, surrounded by memories and possibility. And as the sunlight stretched across the wooden floor and the lake reflected the sky like a promise waiting to be fulfilled, Daniel sensed that whatever his father had planned would not just be about a weekend trip. It would be about reminding him who he was before heartbreak changed him, about pulling him gently back toward hope, and that simple, unexpected phone call had already done something powerful. It made him feel seen. It made him feel chosen, and without even knowing the full reason yet, Daniel understood one quiet truth. His dad had already started to make him happy that day, and they were both standing at the beginning of a moment they would never forget. The cabin felt smaller than Daniel remembered, but the air inside carried something steady and grounding, and as soon as Michael set the bags down and opened the windows, fresh lake air rushed in like a quiet reset button. Daniel didn't know he needed. Dust floated in the sunlight. The wooden floor creaked under their steps, and for a moment neither of them spoke, yet the silence did not feel awkward. It felt patient, like the room itself was waiting for truth. Daniel walked to the old table where he used to draw as a teenager, while his parents laughed over coffee, and memories came back fast, not painful but sharp, reminding him of a time when life felt wide open. He turned to his father and finally asked, "Why now?" Because the question had been building inside him since the phone call, and Michael did not answer right away. He simply leaned against the counter, studying his son with eyes that had seen fire, loss, and years of quiet strength. "Because I know that look," Michael said calmly, his voice steady but softer than usual, and Daniel felt something shift because his father was not the type to talk about feelings, unless it mattered deeply. Michael walked toward him and continued, explaining that after Daniel's mother passed away, he had carried the same heavy silence, the same empty stare that Daniel now wore every day, waking up unsure how to move forward, pretending to be strong while feeling lost inside. Daniel had never heard his father describe that time so openly, and it surprised him how direct he was being, not dramatic, just honest, saying that grief and heartbreak are different shapes of the same pain, both leaving you wondering if love is worth trying again. Daniel sat down slowly, absorbing every word, because he realized his father was not judging him for the divorce, not blaming him, not offering simple advice, but meeting him in the exact space where he was hurting. "You think your story ended," Michael said gently, "but it didn't." And Daniel felt his chest tighten because part of him truly believed that the best version of his life had already passed. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small envelope on the table, sliding it across without ceremony. And Daniel hesitated before opening it, unsure what he would find. Inside was a brochure for a local art center back in Chicago, offering weekend painting classes, and beneath it was a short handwritten note from his father that read, "You were happiest when you created something." And Daniel's throat tightened instantly because he had not picked up a brush in years. He used to paint sunsets, city streets, even simple kitchen scenes. But adulthood, work pressure, and the slow drift in his marriage had pulled him away from that part of himself. And seeing that brochure felt like someone had uncovered a version of him he thought was gone. "I signed you up," Michael said simply, and Daniel almost laughed through the emotion building in his chest, asking why his father would do that without asking first. But Michael's answer was direct, "Because you forgot what makes you feel alive." And there was no accusation in his tone, only belief. Daniel stared at the paper again, thinking about how long it had been since he did something just because it made him happy, not because it was practical or necessary. And he realized he had slowly stopped choosing joy after his marriage ended, convincing himself that routine was safer than hope. Michael pulled out 2 mugs from the cabinet and poured coffee from the thermos, sitting across from his son like they used to when Daniel was younger, and he spoke about how love changing does not mean it disappears, how sometimes relationships end, not because people are bad, but because timing and growth shift in different directions. And Daniel felt relief hearing that from his father instead of replaying his own doubts. He had blamed himself quietly for months, wondering if he was too distant, too focused on work, not enough of something. But his father did not allow him to sit in that space for long, reminding him that failure is not final and that starting again is not weakness. Outside the window, the lake shimmered under afternoon light, calm and wide, and Daniel realized the setting was not random. It was chosen because this was the place where he once dreamed freely, before responsibilities and heartbreak narrowed his world. Michael stood up and opened a small storage chest near the fireplace, pulling out an old sketchbook Daniel had left there years ago, and when he handed it over, Daniel felt like time folded in on itself. Flipping through the pages, he saw charcoal drawings, watercolor attempts, messy but passionate strokes, proof that he once created without fear of judgment, and his father watched quietly as recognition dawned on him. "You don't need to fix everything today," Michael said. "Just start something." And those words landed stronger than any long speech could have. Daniel realized this trip was not about forgetting his divorce or pretending pain never happened. It was about remembering that he was still capable of building something new. The weight he had been carrying did not vanish instantly, but it shifted, becoming lighter, manageable, no longer defining him. He looked at his father and saw not just a parent, but a man who had survived deep loss and still chosen to live fully. And that example felt powerful. Michael did not promise that painting would solve everything or that love would return quickly. He simply believed Daniel deserved another chance at joy. As late afternoon light filled the cabin, Daniel felt a quiet determination rise within him, the kind that does not shout but stands firm. And he understood that this was his father's way of saying he believed in him even when he doubted himself. The envelope, the sketchbook, the drive north. All of it was intentional, a steady reminder that identity is not erased by heartbreak. Daniel closed the sketchbook slowly, holding it like something valuable, and for the first time in months, he imagined himself walking into that art class, unsure but willing. And that image did not scare him. It sparked curiosity. Michael leaned back in his chair, satisfied not because he had solved his son's problems, but because he had reopened a door Daniel thought was closed. The lake outside reflected the bright sky, steady and unshaken, and Daniel realized his father had not brought him there to escape reality, but to face it with courage. This moment, simple yet powerful, marked the turning point, because happiness was no longer something Daniel waited for. It was something he could choose again, and as he looked at his father with gratitude he could not fully express, he knew this conversation inside the quiet cabin would stay with him for the rest of his life. The sun began to lower over the lake, turning the sky into soft shades of gold and pink, and Michael told Daniel to grab his jacket because evenings near the water always carried a cool breeze, and they walked down the narrow wooden path toward the dock where so many family memories had been made. The boards creaked under their steps, and the water stretched out calm and endless, reflecting light like glass. And Daniel felt something inside him settle as they sat side by side with their feet dangling just above the surface, not speaking at first, just listening to the gentle sound of waves touching wood. The quiet was different now, not heavy like the silence in his apartment back in Chicago, but peaceful, and Michael finally broke it by mentioning Daniel's mother, saying she loved sunsets like this because they reminded her that endings could still be beautiful. And Daniel swallowed hard because he had not thought about that perspective in a long time. His father continued, explaining how after she passed away, he used to sit on this same dock alone, unsure how to move forward, convinced that the best part of his life had ended, and Daniel realized this was the first time his father openly described that period without hiding behind strength. Michael admitted he had felt scared of the future, afraid that loving again in any form, friends, hobbies, even simple joys, would somehow dishonor what he lost. But he eventually understood that carrying love forward was not betrayal, it was growth. And those words struck Daniel deeply because he had been doing something similar since his divorce, holding on to the idea that trying again meant admitting failure. The wind moved gently across the lake, brushing against their jackets, and Daniel confessed that he felt foolish for still hurting months later, that he thought he should be stronger by now. But Michael shook his head and said, "Healing has no clock, and that real strength is facing pain instead of running from it." Daniel stared at the horizon and admitted he was afraid to open his heart again, afraid of repeating the same mistakes, afraid of investing in something that might slowly fade. And Michael listened carefully before responding that love is not guaranteed, but neither is regret, and living closed off is its own kind of loss. The sky darkened slightly as birds crossed overhead, and Daniel felt the truth in his father's calm voice, because it wasn't advice from a man who read about resilience. It was from someone who survived deep heartbreak and still chose connection. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and told Daniel that happiness does not come back all at once. It returns in small decisions, like saying yes to a class, yes to a conversation, yes to sitting on a dock instead of staying inside your thoughts. And Daniel realized this entire trip had been one steady push toward those small yes moments. Then his father stood up without explanation and motioned for him to follow back toward the cabin, and Daniel felt curious instead of confused, which was already a change. When they reached the truck, Michael reached into the back seat and pulled out a small box Daniel had not noticed before, and inside were basic painting supplies, brushes, a few tubes of paint, and a blank canvas. And Daniel felt a surprising mix of nerves and excitement because he had not touched these tools in years. "We start now," Michael said simply, not giving him time to overthink, and they set up near the edge of the dock where the last light still touched the wood. Daniel hesitated for a moment, staring at the empty canvas, unsure where to begin, but his father sat down beside him with quiet confidence, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel dipped the brush into paint, his hand slightly shaky at first, and began outlining the horizon, simple strokes forming water and sky, and as the colors blended, something inside him shifted, because he wasn't painting perfectly. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just creating. The lake breeze cooled his face, and he felt present in a way he had not in months, focused not on past arguments or lonely nights, but on mixing shades of orange and blue to capture the fading sun. Michael watched with quiet pride, occasionally making small comments like, "That's good," or "You always liked bold colors." And Daniel found himself smiling without forcing it. The canvas slowly filled with life, a dock, soft waves, two small silhouettes sitting side by side, and even though it wasn't detailed, it felt meaningful. As darkness settled and the first stars appeared, Daniel stepped back to look at what he had made, and instead of seeing flaws, he saw proof that he could still build something from nothing. He realized the painting wasn't just about the lake, it was about this moment, about a father refusing to let his son shrink into sadness, about choosing action over fear. Michael placed a steady hand on Daniel's shoulder and said he was proud of him, not because of the art itself, but because he showed up, and those simple words carried more weight than any motivational speech ever could. Daniel felt emotion rise in his chest, not overwhelming but steady, like gratitude finding its way to the surface, and he understood that this day was not about fixing his life instantly, it was about reminding him that he was still capable of joy. They packed up the supplies and walked back toward the cabin under a sky full of quiet stars, and Daniel felt lighter than he had in a long time. Not because his problems disappeared, but because he no longer felt alone inside them. As they sat on the porch afterward, sipping the last of the coffee, Daniel thought about what his father said about small decisions, and he realized tomorrow he would return to Chicago different, not dramatically changed, but willing. The lake behind them reflected moonlight calmly, steady and patient, and Daniel sensed that something new had begun inside him, something that would lead him toward people and experiences he could not yet see. That sunset painting session, simple and quiet, marked the exact moment fear stopped controlling his future. And though neither of them said it out loud, both father and son knew they had just created a memory that would stay with them forever. Daniel almost turned around when he reached the doors of the Community Arts Center in downtown Chicago, his reflection in the glass showing a man who still carried doubt in his eyes. But he remembered the lake, the dock, and his father's steady voice telling him to choose small yes moments. So he pushed the door open and stepped inside, the soft sound of music and quiet conversation greeting him like a gentle welcome. Easels were arranged in a wide circle. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, and the smell of fresh paint filled the room. and for the first time in months, he felt nervous in a way that wasn't tied to fear, but possibility. He signed in, took a blank canvas, and found a seat, noticing a few other students unpacking brushes and chatting politely, and that's when he saw her, Emily Carter, standing near the window, adjusting her supplies with calm focus, her expression thoughtful but warm, the kind of face that looked like it had known both laughter and loss. She glanced up briefly. Their eyes met for a second, and Daniel quickly looked away, not out of rejection but out of unfamiliar vulnerability, because he hadn't allowed himself to notice anyone new in a long time. The instructor welcomed everyone and introduced the theme for the day: paint something that represents home. And the word home hit Daniel harder than expected, because for months, home had felt like an empty apartment and quiet evenings. Yet suddenly he remembered the lake, the cabin, and his father sitting beside him under a painted sky. Without overthinking, he began sketching the outline of water and a dock, simple strokes forming memory into shape, and as he worked he felt that same focus. He discovered days earlier, steady and grounding, while across the circle Emily painted carefully, her movements confident but gentle. When the class paused for a short break, she stepped closer to look at his canvas and said softly, "That feels peaceful." And Daniel turned slightly, surprised by her direct kindness, explaining it was a lake from his childhood, and she smiled in a way that felt genuine, saying she painted her grandmother's kitchen because that was where she felt most understood. Their conversation stayed simple at first: colors, techniques, how long they had been away from painting. But beneath those words was something deeper. Two people rediscovering parts of themselves they had put aside. As the weeks passed, Daniel kept returning to the class, each session building not just his skill, but his confidence, and Emily often chose the easel beside his, their talks growing longer, moving from art to books, from music to life experiences. And one evening, she shared that she too had gone through heartbreak, a long relationship that ended quietly when both realized they wanted different futures. And Daniel listened carefully, recognizing the same quiet strength he saw in his father. There was no dramatic spark, no rushed emotion, just steady connection, built on honesty and patience. And Daniel found himself looking forward to Tuesdays not just for painting, but for the way Emily's presence made the room feel lighter. After one class, as they stepped outside into cool evening air, Emily suggested grabbing coffee at a small cafe around the corner, and Daniel paused only for a second before saying yes, remembering that choosing connection was part of healing. Inside the cafe, warm lights reflected on wooden tables, and they talked for hours about dreams they once had and dreams they were still shaping, about fear of starting over and the quiet courage it takes to try again. And Daniel noticed how easy it felt to speak without pretending to be stronger than he was. He didn't hide his divorce or his months of isolation, and Emily didn't judge. She simply listened and shared her own lessons about growth and boundaries. Over time, their friendship deepened into something warmer. Small gestures like walking her to her car, sending a message before a big meeting, or sharing a new playlist building trust naturally. And Daniel realized he was no longer comparing her to his past, but seeing her as someone entirely new. One evening after class, he invited her to see the lake painting he had finished, now framed in his apartment. And as she stood quietly studying it, she said it felt like hope captured in color, and Daniel understood she wasn't just talking about the image. Later that night, he called his father, his voice carrying a calm happiness Michael immediately recognized. And when Daniel described the class, the painting, and the woman who made him laugh again, his father simply said, "I told you happiness waits for courage." And Daniel smiled, standing by his window as city lights shimmered below. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel noticed subtle changes in himself. He laughed easier, he worked with more balance, he painted regularly, and most importantly, he allowed himself to care again without letting fear lead. Emily became part of his routine in a healthy way, not filling a void but walking beside him as he built something new, and their relationship grew slowly, rooted in friendship and shared values. One afternoon, Daniel invited his father to the Art Center's small exhibition where students displayed their work, and as Michael walked through the room, proud but humble, he stopped in front of Daniel's lake painting. noticing a new detail added recently. Two figures standing this time instead of sitting, facing the horizon together. Emily stood nearby, greeting Michael warmly, and in that simple meeting, Daniel felt the circle quietly close, because the man who had driven him north to remind him who he was now stood beside him as he stepped into a new chapter. Later that evening, as Daniel and Emily walked along the Chicago River, city lights reflecting like stars in water, he realized something important. His dad hadn't just made him happy for a day. He had changed the direction of his life with one thoughtful act. The pain of his past had not vanished, but it no longer defined him. And as he reached for Emily's hand, feeling her gentle squeeze in return, he understood that happiness is not loud or dramatic. It grows through steady love, courage, and small decisions. That unexpected phone call, that drive to the lake, that simple canvas on a wooden dock had led him here, to a place where hope felt real again. And as he looked up at the night sky above the city, he knew with quiet certainty that he and his father would always remember how everything began the day his dad chose to remind him that life and love were still waiting.